the gunshot echoing through the dusty streets of Verde, Nevada, wasn't what made Lillian Hawthorn's heart stop. It was the letter in her trembling hands. 3 years of marriage to a man who'd never come home, and now the doctor's words confirmed what the town whispered behind her back. She would never bear children. The year was 1875, and in a place where a woman's worth was measured by the cradles she filled, Lillian had just become worthless. The sun beat down mercilessly as Lillian folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket. She wouldn't cry, not here on Main Street where Mrs. Peterson and her gossip circle gathered daily outside the general store. They'd already made her life miserable enough since Thomas's death, with their pitying looks that barely masked their judgment. A widow at 24 with no children and a small ranch she could barely maintain, she was a charity case in their eyes. Miss Lillian called Mr. Jenkins from the telegraph office. Got another response about your advertisement for help with the ranch. Lillian straightened her shoulders and crossed the street, ignoring the stares. Her advertisement in newspapers across 3 states had brought nothing but trouble so far. Drifters looking for easy money, men who thought a widow might be desperate for more than just ranch help. But she couldn't lose Thomas's land. It was all she had left. Where's this one from? She asked, taking the telegram. Wyoming Territory. Says he'll arrive on tomorrow's stage. Name's Garrett Blackburn. Wyoming was far enough away that perhaps this Garrett wouldn't have heard the whispers about her. She thanked Mr. Jenkins and headed toward her wagon, passing the saloon where raucous laughter spilled out into the afternoon heat. A man stumbled through the swinging doors, nearly colliding with her. Well, if it ain't the Barren widow. He slurred, loud enough for everyone on the street to hear. Still trying to find a man willing to work for someone who can't even provide him an heir. Lillian froze, the doctor's letter burning in her pocket like a hot coal. The words struck deeper than any physical blow could have. The telegram crumpled in her fist as she stared at the drunk, bile rising in her throat. That's enough, Parker, came a deep voice from behind her. Sheriff Mills approached, his hand resting on his gun belt. Get on back inside or sleep it off in my jail. Parker sneered but retreated into the saloon. Lillian unclenched her fists, smoothing the telegram with trembling fingers. Don't let him get to you, Mills said quietly. Thomas would have put a bullet in him for talking to you like that. Thomas isn't here, Lillian replied flatly. And I don't need anyone fighting my battles. The sheriff nodded, understanding in his eyes. Still planning to keep that ranch going, until my last breath. Stubborn as ever, he smiled. Your father would be proud. Lillian climbed into her wagon and flicked the reins. The 2-mile ride to her small ranch passed in a blur of dust and unshed tears. The land stretched out before her 50 acres of grazing land, a small creek, the house Thomas had built with his own hands. It wasn't much compared to the larger spreads, but it had been their dream. Now it was her burden. As the wagon crested the hill, she saw the cattle gathered at the far end of the pasture. Only 12 head remained after she'd been forced to sell most of the herd following Thomas's death. The barn needed repairs, the fences were falling down in places, and the vegetable garden that had once been her pride was overrun with weeds. She couldn't manage it alone, but hiring help meant inviting judgment into her home. That night, Lillian sat at her kitchen table and read the telegram again. Garrett Blackburn, experienced ranch hand, references available. Would work for room, board, and fair wages. Something about the straightforward message gave her hope. Perhaps this one would be different. The stagecoach arrived precisely at noon the next day, bringing with it a cloud of dust and 3 passengers. Lillian stood on the boardwalk outside the general store, watching as they disembarked. 2 women she didn't recognize, and a man who stood taller than most in town. He wore a dust-covered duster over practical clothes, a worn Stetson pulled low over his eyes. As he surveyed the town, his gaze landed on her, and Lillian felt an unexpected jolt of awareness. She'd prepared herself to meet a weathered ranch hand, not someone who looked to be only a few years older than her 24 years, with broad shoulders and a confident stride. He approached her directly, as if he somehow knew exactly who she was. "Mrs. Hawthorn?" he asked, removing his hat. His hair was the color of wheat, his eyes a clear blue that reminded her of summer skies. "Yes. Mr. Blackburn, I presume," he nodded, extending his hand. "Garrett Blackburn, I appreciate you considering me for the position." His handshake was firm but not overpowering, his palm calloused from work. Lillian noticed the curious stares from passers-by and suggested they discuss the details at her ranch. "I'll need to collect my gear," he said, gesturing to his bags being unloaded from the stagecoach. "Of course. My wagon's just there." She pointed to where her bay mare stood patiently hitched. "I'll wait while you get your things." As Garrett went to collect his belongings, Lillian felt Mrs. Peterson and her friends watching from the shade of the general store's awning. "Another one, Mrs." Peterson called out, her voice sweet with false concern. "My dear, this must be the fourth man you've brought out to that ranch this month." Lillian's spine stiffened. "Mr. Blackburn has excellent references, Mrs. Peterson. Not everyone judges a person's worth before knowing them." "Oh, I wouldn't dream of judging," the older woman replied, her friends tittering behind her. "But a young widow living alone with a strange man. Well, people will talk." "People already talk," Lillian said quietly. "What's one more rumor to add to the pile?" Garrett returned with a worn leather saddlebag and a rifle case, either oblivious to or ignoring the women's scrutiny. He loaded his belongings into the wagon bed and climbed up beside Lillian, who wasted no time flicking the reins to set them in motion. They rode in silence for several minutes, the town receding behind them. Lillian could feel Garrett's gaze occasionally settling on her profile but kept her own eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I should warn you," she finally said. "What you just witnessed in town, that's a regular occurrence." "The welcome committee," Garrett's voice held a hint of dry humor. "The judgment committee is more like it," Lillian sighed. "I've been widowed for 3 years. My husband was killed in a hunting accident. Since then, I've been trying to keep our ranch going, but it's more than one person can manage." Garrett nodded. "Your advertisement was straightforward. 50 acres, 12 head of cattle, repairs needed, fair wages offered. That's all I need to know." "There's more," Lillian said, deciding honesty was the best approach. "This town has a long memory and little forgiveness for those who don't fit their expectations. A woman running a ranch alone is strange enough. A woman who—" She swallowed hard. "A woman who cannot have children is considered even more of an oddity." She hadn't meant to reveal that part, but something about this stranger made her want to put all her cards on the table. If he was going to judge her like the others, better to know now. Garrett was quiet for so long that Lillian finally turned to look at him. His expression was thoughtful, not judgmental. "Mrs. Hawthorn," he said finally, "I came here to work cattle and repair fences. Your personal matters are your own business. I don't gossip and I don't judge." Relief washed over her, though she kept her expression neutral. "Good. Then we should get along fine, Mr. Blackburn." As the wagon crested the hill revealing her property, Lillian felt a familiar mixture of pride and despair. The small house stood solid against the backdrop of mountains, but the barn's roof sagged visibly, and several fence posts leaned at precarious angles. "It's not much," she said, suddenly self-conscious. "It's good land," Garrett observed. "Plenty of water from that creek, decent grazing. The structures need work, but nothing that can't be fixed. His assessment was practical, void of pity. Lillian appreciated that more than he could know. She showed him to the bunkhouse, a small structure with 2 beds that had once housed ranch hands when Thomas was alive. It was dusty from disuse but solid. "Get settled in," she told him. "Supper's at 6. Tomorrow I'll show you what needs doing first." Garrett nodded, setting his bags on one of the beds. "I'll take a look around if that's all right. Get the lay of the land before dark. Suit yourself." The property line runs to that ridge to the east and follows the creek to the north. Lillian turned to leave but paused at the door. "Mr. Blackburn, I should mention this is a 3-month trial. If it works out for both of us, we can discuss a longer arrangement." "Fair enough." Lillian walked back to the main house, feeling lighter than she had in months. Having someone to share the burden, even temporarily, even a stranger, made the weight on her shoulders less crushing. As she prepared a simple supper of beans, corn bread, and salt pork, she watched through the kitchen window as Garrett walked the property, studying the fences and checking the barn. He moved with purpose, stopping occasionally to examine something more closely or make mental notes. He didn't waste time or motion, and when he approached the cattle, he did so with a quiet confidence that kept them calm. Whatever else Garrett Blackburn might be, he clearly knew his way around a ranch. At precisely 6 o'clock, he knocked on her door, hat in hand, boots wiped clean of dust. Lillian invited him in and motioned to the table where she'd set out their meal. "Nothing fancy," she apologized, suddenly aware of how plain everything was. "Smells a lot better than trail rations," Garrett said, taking the seat she indicated. He waited for her to sit before picking up his fork, a small courtesy that reminded her of Thomas. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Garrett spoke. "Your cattle look healthy, but they could use more range. If we fix the north fence, they could graze all the way to the creek bed." Lillian nodded. "That was the plan before." She didn't need to finish. "Before Thomas died, before everything fell apart. I counted at least 20 fence posts that need replacing. The barn roof needs new shingles on the west side. The corral gate is hanging by one hinge." He ticked off the observations matter-of-factly. "With your permission, I'll start on the fence tomorrow. That'll make the biggest difference right away." "I agree," Lillian said, impressed by his assessment. "There's lumber in the barn that Thomas cut before he passed. Should be enough for the fence posts at least." Garrett nodded. "What about supplies in town? Do you have an account at the general store?" A flush of embarrassment heated Lillian's cheeks. "I did. It's been closed. Mr. Thornton doesn't extend credit to women without husbands." The humiliation of that day still stung. "I pay cash now when I have it." Something flashed in Garrett's eyes, anger perhaps, but his voice remained even. "I understand. I have some money saved. I can purchase what we need until the first wages are due." "That won't be necessary," Lillian said quickly. "I've been saving to make repairs. There's enough." They discussed the work that needed doing, the rhythms of the ranch, the expectations on both sides. It was the most normal conversation Lillian had experienced in 3 years. No pity, no judgment, just practical matters between 2 adults. As they finished the meal, Garrett helped clear the dishes without being asked. "Mrs. Hawthorn," he said as she pumped water into the wash basin, "I want to thank you for the opportunity. Good ranch work is getting harder to find with all the changes happening out here." Lillian glanced at him, surprised by his sincerity. "You don't need to thank me, Mr. Blackburn. If anything, I should be thanking you for taking on such a challenging situation." "Garrett," he said, "if we're going to be working together, you might as well use my given name." She hesitated, then nodded. "Lillian, then. He smiled for the first time since arriving, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face and crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Good night, Lillian. I'll see you at sunrise." True to his word, Garrett was already working when Lillian stepped onto her porch at dawn. He'd started digging out the old fence posts, his shirt already damp with sweat in the early morning light. Lillian brought him coffee and biscuits, which he accepted with thanks before returning to his work. The days fell into a rhythm. Garrett worked from sunrise until dusk, stopping only for meals. Lillian tended her garden, cared for the chickens and her milk cow, and prepared the meals. They spoke mainly of ranch business, but occasionally shared stories of their lives before. Garrett had grown up on a ranch in Wyoming, the middle son of 5 children. He'd left home at 18 to make his own way, working on ranches across the territory, before hearing of Lillian's advertisement from a friend in Cheyenne. He didn't speak of why he'd left Wyoming, and Lillian didn't pry. She, in turn, told him about growing up as the only child of a shopkeeper in Sacramento, moving to Nevada when her father heard about silver strikes, and meeting Thomas when she was 19. They'd married quickly and bought this land with money Thomas had saved working in the mines. The ranch had been their shared dream, a place to raise a family away from the chaos of boomtowns. She didn't mention the years of trying for a child, the growing strain between them as month after month passed with no pregnancy, the arguments that had led Thomas to go hunting alone that fatal day. Some pains were still too private to share. After 2 weeks, the fence repairs were complete, allowing the cattle to graze on fresh pasture. Garrett moved on to the barn roof, replacing rotted shingles and reinforcing weakened beams. The property was beginning to look cared for again, and Lillian found herself humming as she worked in her garden, which was now free of weeds and producing well. On the first trip to town together, Lillian braced herself for the inevitable gossip. Sure enough, as they loaded supplies into the wagon, Mrs. Peterson and her friends gathered nearby, their whispers clearly audible. "Poor thing, so desperate she had to advertise for a man. I heard he sleeps in the house with her. Well, what difference does it make? It's not like she can get in trouble, barren as she is." The last comment hit Lillian like a physical blow. She fumbled with a sack of flour, nearly dropping it before Garrett smoothly took it from her hands. "Ladies," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the street. "Fine day, isn't it? Mrs. Hawthorn and I were just discussing how well the ranch is coming along. We've increased the grazing area by nearly 20 acres with the new fencing." His casual tone and direct address startled the gossips into momentary silence. Garrett continued loading supplies as if he hadn't noticed their discomfort, but his message was clear: he and Lillian were business partners, nothing more and nothing less. As they drove out of town, Lillian's hands were tight on the reins. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Do what?" "Defend me, acknowledge them at all," Garrett shrugged. "Where I come from, we believe in looking people in the eye when we speak about them. If they have something to say, they can say it directly. It doesn't bother you what they're saying. Why should it? We know the truth." He glanced at her. "Unless it bothers you to be associated with me." "No," Lillian said quickly. "No, that's not it at all. I'm used to the talk. I don't want it to make you uncomfortable." "It would take more than a few old biddies to make me uncomfortable, Lillian." The way he said her name, with a quiet respect, made something warm unfurl in her chest. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her as an equal, not as an object of pity or scorn. The spring days lengthened into summer. The ranch flourished under their combined efforts. Garrett fixed the chicken coop, repaired the corral, and built a new smokehouse. Lillian's garden produced abundantly, and she preserved vegetables for the winter months ahead. The cattle grew fat on the expanded pasture, and 2 calves were born healthy and strong. They settled into an easy partnership, their conversations growing more personal as trust built between them. Garrett told her about his brothers, about his father's struggles with drink after his mother died, about his dreams of someday having his own ranch. Lillian shared stories of her childhood in California, of her father's death shortly after her wedding, of Thomas's ambitious plans for their land. Still, she kept the deepest hurt locked away, though sometimes she caught Garrett watching her with a look that suggested he saw more than she revealed. It was during one such moment, as they sat on the porch after supper watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, that he finally asked the question she'd been dreading. "Your husband," he said quietly. "You loved him very much." Lillian's hands stilled in her lap. "Yes, I did." She paused, weighing her words. "But love isn't always enough, is it?" Garrett waited, giving her space to continue or not as she chose. "Thomas wanted children," she finally said, the words coming out in a rush. "Sons to help with the ranch, to carry on his name when it didn't happen. It changed things between us, changed him." She took a deep breath. "The day he died, we'd had an argument. He said maybe he should have married someone who could give him a family." Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away. "He left angry, wasn't paying attention. His horse stepped in a gopher hole, threw him into a ravine." She turned to Garrett, needing him to understand. "His last words to me were cruel, and I never got to forgive him, or ask his forgiveness." Garrett's hand covered hers, warm and steady. "Grief doesn't follow neat lines, Lillian. Neither does forgiveness. The town blames me," she said. "They say if I'd given him children, he wouldn't have been out there alone that day." "That's not fair or true," Garrett said, his voice taking on an edge she'd never heard before. "A man makes his own choices. Thomas chose anger that day. That's not on you." His defense of her, spoken with such conviction, broke something loose inside Lillian. Tears came in earnest now, years of pent-up grief and shame finally finding release. Garrett didn't try to stop her crying or offer empty platitudes. He simply sat beside her, his hand over hers, a solid presence as the sun disappeared behind the mountains and stars began to appear in the darkening sky. When her tears finally subsided, Lillian felt lighter, as if a burden she'd carried for years had finally been set down. They sat in companionable silence as night settled fully around them. "Thank you," she said finally, "for listening, for not judging." "There's nothing to judge," Garrett replied simply. "Life deals hard hands sometimes. All we can do is play the cards we're given." The summer heat intensified as July rolled into August. Garrett repaired the irrigation channels to Lillian's garden, allowing it to thrive despite the dry weather. They worked side by side many days now, Lillian having discovered she enjoyed the physical labor of ranching far more than the indoor tasks society deemed appropriate for women. One scorching afternoon, as they repaired a section of fence damaged by a wandering bear, Lillian became lightheaded in the heat. Garrett noticed immediately when she swayed on her feet. "That's enough for today," he said firmly, taking the hammer from her hands. "You're overheated." "I'm fine," Lillian protested, though the world was tilting alarmingly around her. "Stubborn woman," Garrett muttered, but there was fondness in his voice as he led her to the shade of a large pine tree. He handed her his canteen. "Drink, slowly." Lillian obeyed, the cool water reviving her somewhat. Garrett sat beside her, concern evident in his blue eyes. "You don't have to prove anything to me," he said. "I already know how strong you are." The simple statement, delivered without artifice, touched Lillian deeply. "Force of habit, I suppose. I've been trying to prove myself to this town for 3 years. "Why stay?" Garrett asked. "You could sell this place, start fresh somewhere people don't know your story." Lillian looked out over the land that had become so much a part of her. This was our dream, mine and Thomas's. At first I stayed because leaving felt like admitting defeat. Then, after a while, it became my dream too, separate from him. She shrugged. Besides, where would I go? Garrett was quiet for a moment. Wyoming has good land, open country. People mind their own business mostly. Something in his tone made Lillian look at him sharply. Are you suggesting I move to Wyoming? A flush that had nothing to do with the heat crept up Garrett's neck. I'm suggesting there are places where a woman's worth isn't measured by whether she can bear children. His words hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Lillian's heart beat faster, and not from the heat. In that moment, with the scent of pine surrounding them and the distant call of a meadowlark the only sound, she realized that her feelings for Garrett had grown into something far beyond gratitude or friendship. The realization terrified her. She'd already lost one man she loved. Opening her heart again seemed an impossible risk. And yet, sitting beside Garrett in comfortable silence, she could imagine a future that didn't end with her alone on this ranch, fighting the judgment of a town that would never accept her. Before she could respond, the dinner bell rang from the house, their signal that it was time to clean up for the evening meal. The moment passed, but something had shifted between them, a possibility that hadn't existed before, now hanging in the air like the promise of rain in a drought. That night, Lillian lay awake long after she should have been sleeping, her mind racing with thoughts of Garrett. In the 3 months he'd been at the ranch, he'd become essential not just to the running of the property, but to her own sense of well-being. His quiet strength, his unwavering respect, his ability to see her as a complete person rather than a woman lacking something fundamental, these qualities had snuck past her defenses when she wasn't looking. But what could she offer him in return? A man like Garrett would want a family someday. He'd spoken of his brothers, of nieces and nephews with such warmth. How could she ask him to give up the chance for children of his own? The 3-month trial period was nearly up. Soon, they would need to discuss whether he would stay on or move along. The thought of him leaving made her chest ache with a pain more acute than anything she'd felt since Thomas's death. The next morning, Lillian was uncharacteristically quiet as they worked together to repair one of the corral gates. Garrett gave her space, seeming to understand her need for silence. But as the day wore on, his concerned glances became more frequent. Finally, as they took a break for water in the shade of the barn, he spoke. "Have I done something to upset you, Lillian?" She looked up, startled. "No." "Of course not. Why would you think that? You've barely said 2 words to me all day." He studied her face. "Something's troubling you," Lillian sighed, knowing she couldn't avoid the conversation any longer. "Your 3 months are almost up. We need to discuss whether you'll be staying on." "Is that what's bothering you, whether I'll stay?" "Yes." "No." Lillian struggled to articulate her thoughts. "You've done incredible work here, Garrett. The ranch hasn't looked this good since Thomas was alive. You've more than earned your wages." "But," he prompted gently when she fell silent. "But I can't offer you what you deserve," she finally said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "A man like you should have his own land, his own family, not be tied to a barren widow's struggling ranch." Garrett's expression shifted from concern to something more intense. "Have I ever complained about being here, Lillian? No. But have I ever given you reason to think I'm unhappy with our arrangement? No. Then why are you trying to make decisions about my future based on what you think I deserve?" The directness of the question took her aback. Garrett stepped closer, his voice softening. "If you want me to leave, just say so. But if you're pushing me away because you think that's what's best for me, then I'd appreciate you letting me make that judgment for myself." Lillian looked up at him, at the face that had become so dear to her. "I don't want you to leave," she admitted, "but I don't want you to stay out of obligation either." Obligation, Garrett shook his head, a hint of frustration in his gesture. Lillian, I stay because I want to be here. Because in 3 months, this place has become more of a home to me than anywhere I've been in the last 6 years. He hesitated, then reached for her hand. His palm was calloused against hers, strong and warm. I stay because you're here. The simple declaration sent Lillian's heart racing. She searched his face, looking for any sign of pity or false sentiment, but found only honest emotion in his clear blue eyes. Garrett, she began, but words failed her. I don't need promises or declarations, he said gently. I just need you to know that I'm here because I choose to be, not because I have nowhere else to go or because I feel sorry for you. His thumb traced a gentle pattern on her wrist. You are the strongest, most determined woman I've ever known. Any man would be proud to work alongside you. Tears pricked at Lillian's eyes, but these were different from the tears of grief or shame she'd shed so often. These were tears of relief, of a hope she'd thought long dead flickering back to life. I'd like you to stay, she said softly, not just as a ranch hand. Understanding dawned in Garrett's eyes. He lifted a hand to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle as a whisper. I'd like that too. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility. Then the dinner bell rang again, breaking the spell. Lillian stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how intimate the conversation had become. We should. She gestured toward the house. Yes, Garrett agreed, though reluctance was clear in his voice. We can talk more after supper. That evening's meal was charged with an energy that hadn't existed before. Their conversation flowed as always, touching on the day's work and plans for tomorrow, but beneath the ordinary words ran a current of awareness that made Lillian's skin tingle every time Garrett's gaze met hers. After they'd cleared the dishes, Garrett suggested a walk to check on a new calf born the day before. The evening was cooling rapidly, the heat of the day giving way to a gentle breeze that carried the scent of sagebrush and pine. They walked side by side, not touching but close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed. The new calf was doing well, nursing from its mother in the protected corner of the pasture where Garrett had built a small shelter. They watched the pair for a while, sharing the simple pleasure of seeing new life thrive under their care. Lillian, Garrett said as they turned back toward the house, there's something I need to tell you, something about why I left Wyoming. The serious note in his voice made her look at him with concern. You don't have to explain anything to me. I want to, if we're going to. He hesitated. If we're considering something more between us, you should know. Lillian nodded, giving him time to gather his thoughts. I was engaged once, he finally said, to a woman named Sarah. We'd grown up together, our families' ranches adjoining. It seemed natural that we'd marry, combine our lands eventually. He paused, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. 6 months before the wedding, she got sick. Influenza that turned to pneumonia. She recovered, but the doctor said the illness had damaged her in ways that meant she'd never bear children. Lillian's heart contracted painfully. What happened? Her family wanted her to break the engagement. Said it wasn't fair to me to marry a woman who couldn't give me sons to inherit my land. His voice grew tight with old anger, as if that was all she was worth to me. What did you do? Lillian asked softly. I told them I was marrying Sarah, not her womb, that I loved her exactly as she was. He looked at Lillian directly now. I meant every word, but Sarah, she couldn't bear the thought of depriving me of children. No matter what I said, she believed she was somehow less of a woman, less worthy of love. Understanding dawned in Lillian's eyes. She broke the engagement. Garrett nodded. Married a widower with 3 young children 6 months later, thought she was doing what was best for me. His mouth twisted bitterly. Everyone kept telling me how lucky I was, how I dodged a bullet, how no man wants a barren wife. He stopped walking, turning to face Lillian fully. I left Wyoming because I couldn't stand hearing another word about how Sarah had done me a favor. Because every time someone congratulated me on my narrow escape, I wanted to put my fist through their face. Lillian's throat tightened with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Garrett. I'm not telling you this for sympathy," he said, his voice gentling. "I'm telling you because I want you to understand something, Lillian. When I look at you, I don't see what's missing. I see everything that's there: your strength, your determination, your kindness, your ability to face down a town full of judgment and still hold your head high." He took her hands in his. "I see the woman I prayed I'd find someday. Someone who understands that family isn't just about blood or bearing children. It's about choosing to stand beside each other, come what may." Tears spilled down Lillian's cheeks, but she made no move to wipe them away. "I never thought I'd hear anyone say such things to me again." "I'll say them as often as you need to hear them," Garrett promised. "If you'll let me." "I'm afraid," Lillian admitted. "Afraid to hope again. Afraid to trust that you won't wake up one morning and regret choosing a woman who can never give you children." "I can't promise we'll never have hard days," Garrett said honestly. "But I can promise that I'll never see you as lacking. You are more than enough, Lillian. Exactly as you are." In the fading light, with the ranch spread out around them and the first stars appearing in the darkening sky, Lillian made her choice. She stepped closer to Garrett, raising one hand to touch his face. "Stay," she said simply. "Not just for the ranch, stay for me." Garrett's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Yes," he said, and then his lips were on hers, gentle at first, then with growing certainty as Lillian responded to his kiss with all the emotion she'd kept locked away for so long. When they finally broke apart breathless, Lillian laughed a sound of pure joy that she'd thought she might never feel again. "What's so funny?" Garrett asked, his arms still around her waist. "Nothing," she said, smiling up at him. "Everything. I just never expected to feel this way again." "Neither did I," he admitted. "When I came here, I was just looking for honest work. I wasn't planning to lose my heart to a stubborn widow with fire in her eyes." "Is that what happened? You lost your heart?" "Completely," Garrett confirmed, pressing his forehead to hers. "And I don't want it back." As summer turned to fall, Garrett and Lillian's relationship deepened. They worked side by side during the day, their natural partnership extending to every aspect of ranch life. In the evenings, they sat on the porch talking or simply enjoying each other's quiet company. Sometimes Garrett read aloud from one of the books Lillian's father had left her, his deep voice bringing the stories to life as she mended clothes or shelled beans. Their first trip to town as a couple was met with the expected whispers and stares. Mrs. Peterson cornered Lillian in the general store while Garrett was arranging for lumber to be delivered. "I see your hired man is still around," she said, her voice dripping with insinuation. "Such a handsome young fellow, too. Does he know about your condition?" Before Lillian could respond, Garrett appeared at her side, placing a protective hand at the small of her back. "Mrs. Peterson," he said pleasantly, "Lillian and I were just discussing whether to expand the garden next spring. She's got quite the talent for growing things." The older woman's eyes narrowed at the familiar use of Lillian's first name and the clear message in Garrett's stance. "Well, Mr. Blackburn, you seem to have settled in nicely at the Hawthorn place." "I have indeed," Garrett replied, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Lillian and I make an excellent team." "A team," Mrs. Peterson echoed, glancing between them. "Is that what they're calling it these days, Mrs. Peterson?" Lillian said, finding her voice at last. "Mr. Blackburn and I are courting, properly and with honorable intentions." Not that it's anyone's business but our own." The blunt statement left the older woman momentarily speechless. Garrett used the opportunity to guide Lillian toward the counter where Mr. Thornton was totaling their purchases. "Courting." Mrs. Peterson recovered enough to follow them. "But surely, Mr. Blackburn, you should know that Lillian cannot—" "Cannot what, Mrs. Peterson?" Garrett turned, his voice still pleasant but with an edge of steel beneath. "Cannot run a successful ranch, cannot be a loyal and loving partner, cannot deserve happiness after suffering loss." The store had gone silent, every ear straining to catch the conversation. "You know very well what I mean," Mrs. Peterson hissed, lowering her voice. "She cannot give you children." "Ah," Garrett nodded, as if she'd made an interesting observation about the weather. "Well, in that case, let me be perfectly clear." He looked around the store, making sure everyone could hear him. "Lillian Hawthorn is exactly the woman I've been searching for my entire life. Strong, compassionate, determined, and brave beyond measure." He turned back to Mrs. Peterson, his expression serious. "Whether or not we have children is a private matter between us. But I will say this: there are many ways to build a family, and many children in this world who need homes. Lillian's ability or inability to bear children has absolutely no bearing on my feelings for her or my intentions toward her." He placed money on the counter, nodded to Mr. Thornton, and offered Lillian his arm. "Shall we, my dear? We've got fence posts to set before sundown." Lillian took his arm, her head high as they walked out of the suddenly quiet store. Once outside, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "You didn't have to do that," she said, though her heart was singing at his public declaration. "Yes, I did," Garrett replied, helping her into the wagon. "Not for their sake, but for yours. I won't have anyone making you feel less than the extraordinary woman you are, Lillian. Not ever again." As they drove out of town, Lillian felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. Garrett had faced down the town's most vicious gossip, and defended not just her honor but her worth as a woman. The memory of Thomas's last angry words faded a little more, replaced by Garrett's unwavering support. In October, when the aspen trees turned gold and the nights grew cold, Garrett formally proposed. They were riding the fence line together, checking for damage before winter set in, when he reined his horse to a stop at the highest point of the property. From there, they could see the entire ranch spread out before them: the house and barn, the cattle grazing peacefully, the garden now harvested for winter storage, the creek winding through the property like a silver ribbon. "Lillian," Garrett said, turning in his saddle to face her, "I've been thinking about the future." She smiled at him, the autumn sun turning his wheat-colored hair to gold. "What about it?" "Our future," he clarified. "Together." Lillian's heart skipped a beat. "Go on," she encouraged. Garrett dismounted and came to help her down from her horse. Standing face to face with the ranch stretching out behind them, he took both her hands in his. "I love you," he said simply. "I love your strength and your kindness. I love the way you face each day with determination, no matter what challenges it brings. I love working beside you, talking with you, building something lasting with you." He squeezed her hands gently. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Lillian. Will you marry me?" Tears of joy filled Lillian's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Garrett, I love you too." He pulled her into his arms, his kiss sealing the promise between them. When they finally broke apart, Garrett reached into his pocket and pulled out a small carved wooden box. "I've been working on this at night," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band. "It's not fancy, but it's perfect," Lillian interrupted, her voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely perfect." Garrett slipped the ring onto her finger, and they stood together for a long time, looking out over the land that had brought them together, planning their shared future in quiet, joy-filled conversation. They were married in November, a small ceremony performed by the traveling preacher who visited Verdi every few months. Sheriff Mills stood as witness, along with his wife and a few of the townspeople who had shown kindness to Lillian over the years. Mrs. Peterson and her gossip circle were conspicuously absent, but neither Lillian nor Garrett cared. Their happiness was complete without the blessing of those who had judged Lillian so harshly. As winter settled over the ranch, bringing snow and long evenings by the fire, Lillian and Garrett discussed their plans for spring. They would expand the cattle herd, add more chickens, perhaps even try raising a few pigs. Garrett had ideas for improving the irrigation to the garden and building a larger smokehouse. Lillian wanted to plant fruit trees along the south side of the property. "And maybe," Garrett said one evening as they sat together on the small sofa, Lillian's head resting on his shoulder, "we might consider something else too." "What's that?" she asked, content and drowsy in the warmth of the fire and her husband's embrace. Sheriff Mills mentioned that the McCoy family lost their farm. They're heading back east, but they can't take their 3 children with them. They're looking for good homes. Lillian sat up, fully alert now. 3 children, all together, Garrett nodded. 2 boys and a girl. Ages 8, 6, and 4. Mills said they're good kids, just caught in a bad situation. He watched her face carefully. "I told him we'd think about it." "You want to take in all 3?" Lillian asked, her mind racing with possibilities. "Garrett, that's a huge responsibility." "I know," he said. "And if you think it's too much, we can wait. But I've been thinking about what I said in town that day about there being many ways to build a family." He took her hand, running his thumb over her wedding ring. "Those children need a home, Lillian. We have one to offer." Lillian's heart swelled with love for this man who continued to surprise her with his generosity of spirit. "You think we could do it? Raise 3 children who have already lost so much?" "I think between the 2 of us, we have enough love and determination to give them a good life," Garrett said. "But it would have to be something we both want, completely and without reservation." Lillian thought about the empty bedroom upstairs that she'd once hoped would be a nursery. She thought about the quiet ranch that could be filled with children's laughter. Most of all, she thought about the family she'd given up hoping for, now suddenly within reach in a way she'd never imagined. "Yes," she said, the decision crystallizing in her heart. "Yes, let's do it. Let's bring them home." Garrett's smile was radiant. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," Lillian said, and found it was absolutely true. "Those children need parents who will love them for exactly who they are. Who better than us to give them that?" 2 weeks later, on a clear, cold December day, Sheriff Mills brought the McCoy children to the ranch. They arrived wide-eyed and solemn, clutching small bundles containing their few possessions. Matthew, the eldest at 8, stood protectively in front of his younger siblings. Emma, 6 years old with auburn braids, peeked shyly around her brother's shoulder. Little James, just 4, clung to his sister's hand, his thumb firmly in his mouth. Lillian and Garrett met them on the porch, both nervous but determined to make the children feel welcome. "Hello," Lillian said gently, kneeling to be at eye level with them. "I'm Lillian, and this is my husband, Garrett. We're very happy you've come to stay with us." Matthew regarded her solemnly. "Are you our new Ma and Pa?" Lillian glanced at Garrett, who had knelt beside her. "We'd like to be," she said honestly, "if that's all right with you." "Do we have to be separated?" Matthew asked, his young face fierce with determination to protect his siblings. "No," Garrett assured him. "You'll stay together here with us. We've prepared rooms for you upstairs." "Would you like to see them?" Emma nodded, still half hidden behind Matthew. Little James removed his thumb from his mouth long enough to ask, "Are there toys?" Garrett smiled. There are some wooden animals I carved for you, and books for reading at bedtime. And tomorrow, Lillian added, we thought we might make Christmas decorations together. Would you like that? The mention of Christmas brought the first real spark of interest to the children's eyes. Sheriff Mills, who had been watching the interaction carefully, gave Lillian and Garrett an approving nod before taking his leave, promising to check in on them in a few days. The first weeks were challenging as everyone adjusted to the new arrangement. The children were grieving the loss of their parents and the only home they'd known. They were wary of attachment, afraid of being abandoned again. Lillian and Garrett moved carefully, offering love and security without pushing too hard or expecting too much too soon. Slowly, the children began to settle in. Matthew took an interest in the cattle, following Garrett around the ranch and asking endless questions. Emma discovered Lillian's collection of books and revealed a precocious ability to read far beyond her years. Little James became Lillian's shadow in the kitchen, standing on a chair to help with baking and food preparation. Christmas that year was simple but joyful. Garrett and Matthew cut a pine tree from the property and set it up in the corner of the living room. Lillian and the children decorated it with paper chains, dried apple slices, and the few glass ornaments that had belonged to Lillian's mother. On Christmas Eve, they hung stockings by the fireplace hand knit by Lillian in the evenings after the children were asleep. Christmas morning brought squeals of delight as the children discovered their stockings filled with candy, oranges, and small wooden toys Garrett had carved. Under the tree were practical gifts: new boots for Matthew, a warm coat for Emma, mittens for James, but also special treasures: a pocket knife for Matthew, a journal and pencils for Emma, a stuffed bear for James. But the greatest gift came after breakfast, when Garrett brought out 3 official-looking documents. "These are adoption papers," he explained to the wide-eyed children. "If you'd like, these would make you officially our children. You'd be Blackburns just like us." Matthew looked at the papers, then at Emma and James, then back at Garrett and Lillian. "Forever?" he asked. "No matter what, forever," Lillian confirmed, her heart in her throat. "No matter what? Even if we're bad sometimes?" Emma asked in a small voice. Garrett smiled gently. "Even then?" "Family means loving each other through good times and hard times." Little James, who had been listening with unusual concentration for a 4-year-old, suddenly climbed into Lillian's lap and wrapped his arms around her neck. "I want you to be my mama," he declared. Lillian's eyes filled with tears as she hugged him close. "I want that too, sweetheart." Matthew and Emma exchanged a long look, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Matthew nodded. "We'd like that," he said formally, "to be Blackburns." And so, on Christmas Day, 1875, the family that had begun with a widow's advertisement for ranch help and a cowboy's journey from Wyoming was officially complete. As snow fell gently outside the windows and the fire crackled in the hearth, Lillian looked around at her husband and their 3 children and felt a sense of fulfillment she'd never thought possible. That night, after the children were asleep in their beds, James clutching his new bear, Emma with her journal under her pillow, Matthew with his pocket knife carefully placed on the bedside table, Lillian and Garrett sat together on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in blankets and each other's arms. "Happy?" Garrett asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Beyond anything I could have imagined," Lillian replied honestly. "A year ago I thought my life was over, that all I had to look forward to was struggling to keep this ranch going alone until I was too old to manage it anymore. And now—" She turned in his arms to look at him, at the face that had become as necessary to her as breathing. "Now I have everything. A partner I trust completely, 3 beautiful children who need us as much as we need them, land that's thriving under our care." She touched his face gently. "You gave me back my future, Garrett." He shook his head. "You had the strength all along, Lillian. You just needed someone who could see it." "Someone who didn't see me as lacking," she whispered. "You're not lacking anything," Garrett said firmly. "You never were. And anyone who can't see how extraordinary you are isn't worth your time or tears." As they sat together in the quiet winter night, looking out over the ranch that had brought them together, Lillian thought about the path that had led her here, the grief that had nearly broken her, the judgment that had isolated her, the advertisement born of desperation that had brought Garrett to her door, and now the family that had formed not from blood ties but from choice, from love, from the simple, profound recognition of each other's worth beyond society's narrow definitions. Spring would come, bringing new calves and green grass, fruit trees to plant and garden rows to tend. The children would grow, putting down roots in this land just as surely as the saplings they would plant together. There would be challenges ahead, 3 children healing from loss, a ranch always demanding attention, a town that might never fully accept their unconventional family. But Lillian wasn't afraid anymore. Whatever came, she and Garrett would face it together, with the strength they'd found in each other and in the family they'd built from love rather than obligation. "You're still the woman I prayed for," Garrett murmured against her hair. "The one I've been looking for all my life." Lillian smiled, content in the knowledge that sometimes the greatest blessings come not from getting what you thought you wanted, but from discovering what you truly needed all along. "And you," she said, "are the answer to a prayer I didn't even know how to speak." Above them, stars glittered in the clear winter sky, bearing witness to a love that had defied expectation and judgment to create something beautiful and enduring on this small patch of Nevada soil, a family bound not by blood but by choice, and all the stronger for it.